Here we're going to talk about 19 rules of typography taken from a book by Rob Carter. There are 19 basic rules here which I'm going to go over briefly, and remember that you want to know these rules and you want to work with them before you take off and do wild and crazy typographic experiments. Certainly there are designers that have done that very well, but guaranteed they have understood and used these rules before breaking into the unconventional terrain, as is said here. So rule number 1, for optimum legibility, choose classical time-tested typefaces. Now in this course you're given a set of required fonts to use, so you're all set there. And all of the fonts that you're using in the class have been time-tested and proven to be very applicable to many different applications. So that isn't a problem here in this course. Going forward, when you're on your own, you want to keep in mind that for body copy generally, use really readable typefaces. Number 2, be mindful not to use too many at one time. A good rule of thumb is really no more than 2 in a piece. It's best, of course, if you're not sure, to just stick with one font and use different styles of it. But 2, maybe 3, depending upon what you're doing, but really keep it simple. Number 3, avoid combining typefaces that are too similar. If you used, say, a Garamond and a Baskerville in the same piece, it would look like you made a mistake. So when you do use different typefaces, make sure they contrast sufficiently yet work well together. And that takes time. It takes time to figure that out. There's a lot of information online about good type combining. Rule 4, text set in all capital letters severely retards reading. Now we're talking about body copy here, not in headlines. All capital letters are all the same height, so it becomes a little harder to read it, especially if it's small in body copy and with a lot of lines. So your body copy should always be upper and lower case. Rule 5, used sizes that according to legibility studies prove most readable. A good rule of thumb is 12 points. Okay, you can go a little smaller depending upon the font, or a little higher, but no higher than 14, because then you're getting into display type sizing and headline sizing. So start with 12 and adjust from there. Rule 6, avoid using too many different sizes and weights at the same time. Bold and thin and expanded and italic and different sizes in a paragraph. It gets busy very fast and it becomes the mark of an amateur designer. You want to keep things simple and clean. Rule 7 and 8 go together. Use text types of book or medium weight and medium width in your body copy. Sometimes you'll see a type style that is called book, and that means it is a medium weight. We want to be really conservative with weights and widths and styles in any body copy that we use. Rule 9, use consistent letter and word spacing to produce an even, uninterrupted texture. Your paragraphs have a texture. The letters and the words and lines work together, and you want to have a nice, even texture throughout your paragraph. Sometimes we talk about type color, text color, and that isn't the color of the letters, but rather the spacing, which creates an either dark, tightly spaced look or a wide open, lighter look. Whatever you choose, it should be consistent throughout your paragraph, and you do that with your tracking and your word and letter spacing. Rule 10, appropriate line lengths. Lines that are too long or too short can really make it hard to read. Notice that I have nice wide margins on this page here. The line length is easy to read. It's not too long, but it's not short and choppy either. A good rule of thumb here is to use about 10 to 12 words per line. Good rule of thumb. Rule 11. For text type, use line spacing, also known as leading, that carries the eye from one line to the next. Usually your leading should be a couple of points higher than your type size, as you see here in this specification. Rule 12, flush left, rag right is a really good alignment, and that's what this is set in. The left side is straight, the right side is ragged. It's the most readable because the word and letter spacing is the most even in that alignment. Sometimes justified can be really attractive, but you'll have to work with your tracking to make sure there aren't any holes in the text if you do use that. Rule 13, Consistent rhythmic rags. Now on the computer this is pretty much given to you because when you set up your paragraphs your line lengths are determined by the computer and you're not going to get really weird rags. But if you ever have to break your own lines with a hard return, make sure that you don't have really long lines and then really short ones together. Make sure the right side of a ragged alignment is fairly smooth and consistent. Rule 14, clearly indicate paragraphs. The two most common ways to do it are by indenting the first line. I don't really like that as much because it creates a rag on the left. It's much better, I think, and most designers feel this way now, is just to insert additional space between your paragraphs. Rule 15, avoid widows and orphans. Now this particular rule does have an orphan, rather a widow in it, and that's a little word at the end of a paragraph. You want to avoid those because they can be distracting, and you can do that by working with your tracking or your type size. You want to avoid those short little lines at the end. And yes, it's left there on purpose to show you. Rule 16, be careful how you emphasize your elements within body text. Don't just use bold and italic and change your type size or color arbitrarily. Make sure that anything you emphasize has a really good reason to be emphasized. 17, always maintain the integrity of type. Now with a logo, sometimes you can stretch or alter your letters, but for body copy, we want to really pay homage to the beauty of the typefaces that we're using. It's not considered good form to distort and stretch letters. Rule 18, for body copy especially, use that baseline. Don't have letters and words flying off into space because that will retard the reading significantly. And lastly, and this is very important, when working with type and color, ensure that sufficient contrast exists. Really important to be able to read your text. If you have a busy background, for instance, or if you use a dark background with dark text, it won't be read, it won't be successful. So keep in mind that you need to have contrast when you're working with type and its background. So I hope these tips are helpful. This Word doc is available in the Week 2 Reading and Tools section, and you can download it and refer to it on your own. But please become familiar with these rules. They will help you going forward. Thanks.